While Mary was cleaning up around her husband's grave one day, she stumbled upon something highly disturbing, a strange-looking hole in the ground right by his grave. After pondering for a while about what it might be, she decided to take a bold step. What happened next startled her completely. It wasn't unusual for Mary to go almost a month without visiting her husband's grave. They had never been very wealthy, so work was a priority. He had requested to be buried upstate with his family at an old cemetery, making it quite difficult to visit him. But she made an effort regardless. After all, she had loved him very much. Thankfully, she got Mondays off from work at the diner, so she would often seize the opportunity to go then. One particular Monday, she traveled upstate to visit Henry's grave. It was cold and dreary as fall was rolling in. When she saw his headstone, she immediately felt ashamed. The grass had overgrown terribly, along with some horrible-looking weeds. Compared to the other headstones, Henry's looked to be in shambles. Along with the grass, there were tons of leaves from the overhanging tree above. It was going to take some work to clean up the area, but Mary didn't mind. She knew the bus timetable by heart and would just catch the last bus that afternoon when she was done. So she set down her bag, took out her gardening tools, and went to work cleaning up the area. She first started by clearing away the leaves. While she was collecting the bunch by his headstone, she noticed the peculiar-looking hole. She went to take a closer look and found that it was quite deep. In fact, she was sure that it was probably as deep as the grave itself. It wasn't small either. The entrance to the hole was quite wide. The curiosity of what the hole might be quickly turned into a sense of dread. The hole was a bit too close to the headstone for her liking. In fact, she was worried that it might be going down a bit too near his coffin. She went to find the cemetery custodian and showed him what she was concerned about. He looked briefly and then brushed her off, saying it was probably nothing. He assured her that he took the best care of the graves and that nothing could disturb the beloved people who had been buried. Mary was hardly convinced by this. By the mere state of the cemetery itself, she struggled to believe that this man was taking the greatest care of everything. In addition, she simply couldn't shrug off the gut feeling she had. There was something about the whole situation that made her uncomfortable, so she decided to call her son and see what he thought. Straight off the bat, her son seemed to think she was crazy. He told her to stop faffing around the headstone, do what she came for, and then leave. He even went so far as to say that his father would not have liked her to worry like she was about something as stupid as a hole in the ground. Insulted and quite hurt, Mary sat for a while staring at the hole. She knew her son was probably right about what her husband would think, but if he were in her shoes, she knew her husband would have checked to see what was going on. So she got up and decided to act on her gut feeling. She went to the custodian's tool shed and sneakily took a spade from the back. He was nowhere to be seen, which did not surprise her much. She then quickly went back to the grave and began to dig where the hole was. Being a small, frail woman, this was not an easy feat for her at all. She struggled to get the hard ground loose enough to pull it all up. She started picking at the hole with the corner of the big spade, trying to get some kind of movement in the ground. At this moment, she was confronted by an elderly man behind her. He shouted at her, asking what on earth she was doing. A bit embarrassed and slightly scared about what the man might think, she took her time answering, trying to explain as sweetly as possible as she was investigating where the hole went. What happened next surprised her in a good way. Once the man heard what she was trying to do, he perked up and offered to help her. He jokingly shared that he had initially thought she was up to something criminal, but investigating a suspicious hole seemed like a good idea in hindsight. His late wife was buried there, so he didn't want anything to happen to her. He was much stronger and more nimble than Mary, so opening up the hole in the ground proved to be much easier. He threw the spade into the ground over and over, pulling up the earth as he went. Mary stood behind him, anxiously waiting to see what lay beneath. At first, it was hard to see what was going on with all the moving ground, but then the spade hit something hard with a big knock. Mary's stomach rose up in her throat. That didn't sound good at all. Did he just hit her husband's coffin? Obviously, the man was thinking the same thing because he suddenly recoiled from digging. He stood back, trying to see if he could see what he just hit. Sure enough, Peeping out a lot more shallowly than it should have been was a coffin. The hole had led straight to Henry's coffin, which seemed to have a gaping hole in the wooden side. Immediately, Mary's mind went to the worst-case scenario. She was convinced that this was just like a story she had recently read about grave robbers who desecrated the dead for some wooden nonsense. The black market was rife with interactions like these. Frightened of what she might see, she told the man to stop. She then called the police, quickly explaining what they had stumbled upon. They arrived promptly and began investigating. They had to call in a bulldozer to bring the coffin up. Naturally, Mary was feeling quite overwhelmed. When she put her husband in the ground, she didn't expect to bring him up again, definitely not a year later. When they brought the coffin up, the hole in the side of the coffin was easily noticeable, but there was something peculiar about the shape of it. When the police took a closer look at the edging, something startling became clear. Without saying much to Mary, they called in a specialist to be sure. Once he got there, he was able to confirm their theory right away. It turns out that some sort of pesky rodent had been burrowing around Henry's grave and had actually gnawed its way through the coffin. This happened because of two things. First, the family had buried Henry in a very simple pine coffin due to a lack of funds. The second was much more sinister. The specialist deemed that the cemetery had been cutting corners and procedures regarding how they buried the casket. The depth of the grave was meant to be much deeper with a better seal to help prevent this sort of desecration. When they broke the news of what had happened to Henry's coffin and her husband's body to Mary, she found herself at a complete loss for words. She knew something wasn't right. She immediately broke down, unable to move. Her poor body had been subjected to such horror, all because of the negligent staff at the cemetery. Fortunately, the man who had assisted her accompanied her to the police station, where she filed claims against the abhorrent treatment her husband's remains had received. She felt grateful that she had discovered the issue in time to stop it, but she was horrified that it had happened in the first place. Once the investigation was over, she vowed to use the money from her lawsuit to get Henry a proper second burial. She needed to know that he was sent off the right way. This time, she would bury him closer to home so she could visit him more often. This experience shows that it pays to trust your instincts and choose the right establishment. Can you imagine how terrible Mary must have felt? What would you have done if you saw the hole? I'm really keen to know your thoughts, so please don't hesitate to share your insights in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video and found it engaging, I invite you to subscribe to our channel for more similar content. Feel free to share this video with your friends and family to spread the enjoyment. Take good care of yourselves, and I'm excited to connect with you in our future videos.